Static violently cuts through the silence. A voice, trembling and raw, screams through the heavily encrypted frequency. "Mayday! We are under attack by unidentified jet fighters!" The camera pulls back, leaving the claustrophobic radio room for a drone shot high above the Mediterranean. The water below is bleeding a deep, unnatural red. This is not a Soviet ambush. The jets diving from the clouds, dropping napalm on American sailors, belong to a primary ally. You believe your government will protect you if you wear the uniform. You trust that an American flag guarantees a rescue when the gunfire starts. The tragedy of the USS Liberty shatters that illusion permanently. It proves that if your death serves a larger geopolitical algorithm, rescue operations will be deliberately recalled while you burn on the open water. Ignorance of this cold, mathematical calculus makes you nothing but a blind pawn in someone else's war game. I am pulling you out of the propaganda matrix. I will give you the optic of a frontline intelligence officer, showing you how to read the heavily redacted lines of history. Together, using modern forensic declassification, we will track the exact moment a geopolitical betrayal is calculated and executed in the shadows. We are stepping directly into the crosshairs of the deadliest unsolved attack on an American intelligence vessel. It is June of 1967. The air is choking with cordite and thick black smoke. The steel deck of the USS Liberty is slick with a horrific mixture of seawater and human blood. Through the eyes of a signals intelligence operator, trapped in a vibrating compartment below deck, the world is ending. Above him, the charred remnants of a massive American flag snap violently in the wind as armor-piercing rounds rip through the primary radar dishes. This is not a foggy night in contested waters. It is a cloudless, brilliant afternoon. That massive 5 by 8 foot American flag is fully extended in the Mediterranean breeze, clearly visible from a distance of several miles. The operator listens to the deafening roar of jet engines passing overhead, his hands slick with sweat on the decryption dials. He knows the standard protocol for misidentification. This breaks every single rule. The attack aircraft did not just stumble upon this vessel. Military logs confirm they made multiple low-altitude reconnaissance passes over the course of 9 agonizing hours before initiating the assault. They flew low enough for the crew to wave at the pilots. They explicitly logged the specific GTR-5 hull designation numbers painted boldly on the bow. They mapped the architecture of the ship. They knew exactly who they were hunting. The operator feels the bulkheads buckle violently inward as the first wave of rockets detonates. Dust and shattered glass rain down on the top-secret encryption machines. He frantically attempts to route a distress signal through the jammed frequencies. The front line has suddenly materialized on a designated non-combatant ship. Adrenaline floods his system as the grim realization hits. The attackers are actively targeting the communication arrays to blind them. An accidental friendly fire incident lasts seconds, maybe minutes, before the screaming radios halt the carnage. This massacre drags on for a staggering 2 hours. Wave after wave of fighters and torpedo boats deliberately carve the ship to pieces. By the time the guns finally fall silent, the butcher's bill is catastrophic. 34 Americans are killed in action, and 171 are severely wounded on the shattered, smoking deck. You cannot dismiss this as a momentary navigation error. Decades later, meticulous forensic analysis of the superstructure paints a chilling picture of methodical extermination. Investigators logged exactly 821 rocket and machine gun holes punched through the steel hull. Every single impact represents a conscious trigger pull by a pilot who had already visually confirmed the nationality of the unarmed ship below them. Below the waterline, the situation morphs from a combat zone into a flooded tomb. Cold Mediterranean water surges through the jagged shrapnel wounds in the hull. The operator wades through waist-deep water, the smell of ozone and burning insulation searing his lungs. The survival instincts scream to abandon ship, but the life rafts topside are already being shredded by concentrated cannon fire. They are trapped in a floating execution chamber. Look closely at the crime scene. The tactical precision of the strike contradicts every official narrative of battlefield confusion. You do not deploy napalm against a randomly identified cargo freighter. You do not spend 2 hours systematically dismantling radio antennas if you think you are shooting at an enemy transport. This is a targeted assassination. Someone ordered the complete and total erasure of this specific American crew. The operator finally manages to punch a distress signal through the heavy jamming interference. Flash! 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 USS Liberty taking heavy damage! He expects the sky to immediately fill with the roar of American phantoms. The mightiest naval force on the planet, the Sixth Fleet, is stationed just 15 minutes away. Survival should be guaranteed. But as the minutes bleed out, the horizon remains agonizingly empty. The cavalry is not coming. The silence on the rescue frequency is heavier than the sound of the incoming rockets. This is the moment the tactical anomaly elevates into a geopolitical nightmare. A highly sophisticated surveillance platform, crawling with elite linguists and cryptographers, is being systematically slaughtered in broad daylight. Yet, the military apparatus designed to protect them is paralyzed. The chain of command has seemingly short-circuited in real time. We are left standing in the smoking wreckage of a paradox. The USS Liberty was explicitly designed to listen, not to fight. It was the eyes and ears of the National Security Agency, a floating vault of top-secret intercepts. By all conventional logic, it should have been shielded by the sheer weight of American naval power. Instead, it was left completely exposed, isolated, and offered up as a sacrificial lamb on the altar of international relations. This forces us to confront the chilling concept of an unsinkable target. How does a highly visible, non-combatant intelligence ship suddenly become the most aggressively hunted vessel in the sea? If the attackers knew exactly who they were hitting, and Washington heard the screams for help, we must ask the forbidden question. What damning secret was the Liberty about to broadcast that made the death of 34 Americans an acceptable loss? I need you to listen to that silence on the rescue frequency. It is not a communications blackout. It is an intentional, bureaucratic gag order echoing across the Mediterranean. The USS Liberty is burning down to the waterline, broadcasting desperate, unencrypted screams for help. Yet just a few hundred miles away, the deadliest naval armada on the planet sits completely paralyzed. The water is slick with blood, and the rescue grid is entirely static. We are shifting focus to the flight deck of a United States carrier strike group. Adrenaline is spiking. F-4 Phantoms are fully armed and chained to the deck. The pilots are already strapped into their cockpits, practically ripping the radios out of their helmets, screaming for launch clearance. They hear the slaughter happening in real time. They are ready to punch through the sound barrier. But a flashing red light dominates the control tower. The deck is locked down. The math of this paralysis is terrifying. This is not a logistical failure. The Sixth Fleet is stationed a mere 15 minutes away from the coordinates of the USS Liberty by supersonic jet travel. Those phantoms could be dropping out of the clouds locking on to the attacking fighters before the next wave of napalm even hits the deck. The survival of the crew is physically guaranteed by proximity. But geography means nothing when the chain of command turns hostile. We have hit the absolute paradox of inaction. Why do you actively ground your own strike fighters when your sailors are bleeding out on an open frequency? This is the moment the tactical failure becomes a crime scene. A rescue mission is a fundamental, non-negotiable protocol of naval warfare. To abort it requires a deliberate, counterintuitive override from an authority higher than the frontline commanders. Someone is watching the radar screen and choosing not to intervene. I'm tracking this anomaly up the chain of command. When frontline troops have denied the right to defend their own, you follow the paper trail of the stand-down order. The carrier admirals did not freeze under pressure. They gave the initial green light. The first wave of rescue aircraft actually catapulted off the deck. They were in the air, weapons hot, banking hard toward the coordinates of the burning intelligence ship. And then, the impossible happened. The kill switch was thrown in Washington. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara personally intervened, bypassing standard military doctrine. He issued a direct, recorded order to recall the rescue aircraft that had already launched. Understand the gravity of this action. The head of the Pentagon reached across the globe, grabbed the controls of airborne fighter jets, and dragged them back to the flight deck while American sailors were actively taking torpedo fire. This is the bureaucratic equivalent of friendly fire. McNamara's override is a cold, calculated transaction. He is looking at the macro-strategic chessboard of the Cold War, balancing the geopolitical math, and deciding that the men on that ship are an acceptable loss. The frontline commanders are looking at a massacre. The Secretary of Defense is looking at an algorithm. The rescue is aborted not because it is impossible, but because it is politically inconvenient. The military apparatus violently rejects this virus in the system. Rear Admiral Lawrence Geiss, commanding the carrier group, openly rebels against the recall order. He is listening to the massacre on the combat net. He refuses to accept that the Pentagon is deliberately abandoning a United States vessel in international waters. Geiss demands the unthinkable. He challenges the Secretary of Defense and demands direct vocal confirmation from the President himself. The strike group is in absolute agonizing limbo. The carrier deck vibrates with the roar of idling jet engines, burning aviation fuel while the clock runs out for the Liberty. The admirals are engaged in a vicious standoff with the White House over an encrypted line. Every second of diplomatic hesitation costs another life in the Mediterranean. This is the raw friction between the men fighting on the front lines and the architects of global policy hiding in the capital. The confirmation comes down, and it shatters the fundamental contract of military service. President Lyndon B. Johnson personally confirms the stand-down order. The commander-in-chief states unequivocally that he would rather see the ship go to the bottom of the ocean than embarrass an ally. The political optics of the Middle East dictate the survival rate of American citizens. The betrayal is total, absolute, and documented at the highest echelons of power. I want you to internalize the sheer ruthlessness of that presidential directive. The men on the Liberty were not killed by a random fog of war. They were sacrificed to protect an international relationship. The United States government calculated the exchange rate between the blood of 34 intelligence operatives and the strategic stability of the region, and it made the trade. This is the autopsy of an alliance, where treason is simply a matter of executive perspective. Back on the carrier deck, the flashing red light remains active. The engines of the F-4 Phantoms are powered down. The pilots are forced to climb out of their cockpits, defeated, listening to the final, static-laced transmissions of a dying ship they were forbidden to save. The strike group is neutralized without firing a single shot. The attack on the Liberty continues unhindered, sanctioned by the very government that deployed the vessel into the combat zone. The rescue was aborted because the ship was supposed to sink. A total loss of the hull and the crew would have buried the evidence at the bottom of the sea, allowing the cover-up to remain flawless. But the Liberty did not go down. It survived long enough to drag its mangled superstructure into port. And now, the true investigation begins. We are going to rip open the hull and let the forensic ballistics expose the identity of the assassins they tried to protect. We leave the paralyzed flight decks of the Mediterranean and the sterile offices of the Pentagon behind. The politics of treason are abstract, but the physics of a kill shot are brutally absolute. You are stepping into the cold fluorescence of a high-tech naval forensic lab. Here, the mangled steel of the survivor does not lie. The analyst on duty dims the lights, bringing a massive screen to life. A three-dimensional digital model of the ship's destroyed hull begins to rotate slowly in the darkness. Every weapon deployed in combat leaves behind a distinct psychological profile of the attacker. You are looking at the signature of an executioner, not a tragic case of friendly fire. The analyst isolates the initial phase of the assault, stripping away the exterior plating on the digital projection. We are hunting for intent. Collateral damage is random, spraying kinetic energy across a wide area. But an assassination attempt operates on surgical, premeditated cruelty. Look at the first points of impact, blinking red on the superstructure. The attacking fighters did not drop unguided ordnance. They executed precision strafing runs specifically targeting the communication arrays. The ship was systematically blinded and muted before the heavy munitions were even armed. This is the first tactical phase of an isolation protocol. You cut the vocal cords of your target so they cannot transmit the identity of their attackers to the paralyzed Sixth Fleet. Once the distress frequencies were neutralized, the atmospheric chemistry of the assault fundamentally changed. The unmarked Mirage fighters transitioning over the deck were not carrying standard armor-piercing rounds. They dropped napalm canisters. The analyst pulls up the thermal residue reports. This is a highly volatile incendiary gel designed to stick to bulkheads and human flesh, burning at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a chemical weapon deployed to incinerate, not disable. The deployment of napalm against a lightly armored vessel exposes a terrifying objective. You do not use incendiary gel to stop engines. You use it to obliterate the personnel and the classified equipment housed inside the superstructure. The fire consumes the oxygen on deck, creating a suffocating vacuum. The analyst traces the scorch marks on the digital model, tracking how the flames were strategically meant to drive the surviving crew below decks, trapping them for the final blow. Down in the digital sub-basement of the lab, the simulation shifts to the hydrodynamic environment. The analyst highlights a massive, jagged rupture tearing through the starboard side. This is the torpedo impact zone. It struck precisely at the waterline, but it was not aimed at the engine room or the ammunition magazines. The trajectory was calculated to detonate directly inside the cryptologic spaces. The kill shot was aimed straight at the brain of the intelligence operation. The cryptologic section was the most heavily guarded compartment on the vessel, packed with highly trained linguists and interception specialists. The torpedo strike instantly obliterated this critical mass of human intelligence. The mathematical precision required to hit this exact compartment from a fast-moving patrol boat is staggering. The analyst overlays the ship's blueprints onto the impact crater. The attackers possessed detailed structural knowledge of their target's internal layout. The hydrodynamic shockwave ripped through the hull, instantly flooding the lower compartments with thousands of tons of crushing seawater. 34 Americans were trapped in a steel coffin while the ocean poured in through a hole the size of a suburban house. The acoustic telemetry of the blast proves the firing vessel was positioned for maximum catastrophic damage. This was an engineered decapitation strike, designed to ensure the intelligence gathered by the ship sank with the bodies. But the forensic horror does not end with the torpedo detonation. The analyst pulls up the most damning piece of physical evidence logged in the damage reports. When the listing ship began to flood, the desperate crew deployed inflatable life rafts into the oil-slicked Mediterranean. The attacking torpedo boats did not hold their fire and observe the sinking vessel. They closed the distance and deliberately opened up with heavy machine guns, shredding the empty rubber rafts in the water. You are witnessing a direct, documented violation of fundamental international maritime law. Shredding survival equipment is a tactic reserved for total annihilation. The analyst cross-references the bullet trajectories with the debris field. The boats circled the dying ship like apex predators, ensuring that no witnesses would survive the sinking. If the hull went under, every single crew member was meant to drown or burn. They wanted a ghost ship at the bottom of the sea. The sheer resilience of the human beings on board disrupted the geopolitical algorithm. Despite the napalm, the precision torpedo strike, and the shattered life rafts, the damage control teams held the bulkheads together. They fought the flooding in pitch-black, toxic water, sealing compartments by hand. The analyst stares at the digital model of the crippled vessel. The attackers threw everything in their arsenal at a non-combatant, yet the hull stubbornly refused to fracture completely. The evidence mapped across this digital autopsy destroys any plausible deniability. The sequence of events is too perfect. Mute the communications, incinerate the exterior deck, torpedo the intelligence nerve center, execute the survivors in the water. The forensic footprint is loud, methodical, and undeniably premeditated. The naval archivist locks the final damage report into the secure database. You cannot execute an accidental attack with this level of orchestrated surgical violence. The physical hull tells the story of how they were slaughtered, but it does not reveal the faces of the executioners. The attackers thought they had silenced the ship. They believed the operation was clinically secure. But they made one fatal, arrogant mistake in the airspace above the carnage. While the torpedo boats were hunting survivors, the fighters were broadcasting their own crime to the sky. I am about to take you into the raw intercepts, where the ghosts recorded their own confession. Step into the claustrophobia of a dark, soundproof monitoring room. The air is thick with the hum of electronics and the smell of ozone. Before you, oscilloscopes spike violently with jagged green lines, dancing to the chaotic frequency of combat. We are shifting from the shattered steel of the Mediterranean directly into the invisible architecture of signals intelligence. The hull is dead, but the radio waves are still screaming in real time. High above the burning water, an airborne surveillance platform circles completely out of sight. Inside, the signal's intelligence intercept operator hunches over a spinning vintage tape reel. The headset presses hard against their ears, blocking out everything but the frantic staccato burst of Hebrew pilot chatter. This is the front line of the invisible war. You do not fire bullets here. You capture the microscopic vibrations of the enemy's voice. This brings us to a fatal flaw in the architecture of a cover-up. The attackers flawlessly executed the physical blackout. They destroyed the transmitting dishes and massacred the crew. But they forgot the ghost in the machine. You can butcher a ship to maintain silence, but you cannot stop your own tactical radio transmissions from bleeding into the atmosphere. They broadcast their own war crime to the open sky, and we caught it on tape. The operator tightens their grip on the console. The intercept is raw, staticky, and moving at the breakneck speed of a dogfight. They are translating the intercept in real time as the unmarked Mirage fighters begin their devastating strafing runs. The adrenaline spikes. The operator expects to hear confusion. They expect to hear a tragic miscalculation, a pilot realizing they have struck a neutral target. That is not what happens. We know exactly what was said, down to the syllable. For decades, the intelligence community denied these tapes existed, but the declassified audio transcripts finally forced into the public light in the year 2012 shatter the illusion of an accident. The tapes confirm the absolute worst-case scenario. The attacking pilots clearly and explicitly identified the target as an American vessel before dropping the payload. Listen to the phantom echo of the dogfight. The pilot drops altitude. The massive 5-by-8-foot American flag fills their canopy. They read the hull designation numbers perfectly through the optical sights. The operator hears the pilot key the microphone and transmit the identification back to the command center. There is no hesitation. There is no static obscuring the words. The pilot knows exactly who is bleeding in the water below. This is the tipping point. The moment the trigger is paused. The intercept operator holds their breath, waiting for the frantic abort order from ground control. The identification has been made. The mistake has been caught. In any standard military engagement, this is where the commander screams over the radio to pull up, to cease fire, to avert an international catastrophe. The operator waits for the rescue protocol to begin. The response from ground control slices through the static like a scalpel. It is cold. It is calculated. Ground control acknowledges the American identification loud and clear. And then, the unthinkable happens. The command center orders the pilots to proceed with the total destruction of the ship regardless. The operator hears the death warrant of 34 Americans signed, sealed, and delivered over an open tactical frequency. We have found the smoking gun. If hearing this undeniable proof of a calculated betrayal makes your blood run cold, hit the like button right now. To ensure that the rest of this geopolitical cover-up does not stay buried in the archives, subscribe to the channel. And I want you to tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were the operator, forced to listen as your own government allowed your brothers to be slaughtered? The tape reel continues to spin, merciless and indifferent. The operator hears the pilot confirm the kill order. The final, devastating torpedo run is initiated. The oscilloscope spikes violently into the red zone as the explosion registers on the acoustic sensors. The operator rips off the headset, sickened by the realization. This was not the fog of war. This was a state-sponsored execution, monitored and logged from thousands of feet in the air. The physical ship is burning, but the intelligence payload has been secured. The operator seals the magnetic tape into a secure canister. This reel is the ultimate leverage. It is the undeniable proof of a deliberate assault on a sovereign United States vessel by a primary ally. You would expect this canister to be rushed directly to the Oval Office, to be played for the press, to ignite an immediate demand for international justice. But geopolitics is a machine completely devoid of morality. The moment the intercept reel hits the Pentagon, the trap shuts. The audio does not go to the press. It does not go to the surviving crew members fighting for their lives in the hospital. Instead, the intelligence intercepts are immediately classified as top-secret code word. They are locked behind the highest, most impenetrable security clearance in the United States government. Understand the chilling reality of this classification. Top-secret code word is not used to hide tactical data from a foreign adversary. The attackers already knew what they did. They pulled the trigger. They gave the order. The enemy had the exact same audio on their end. So who exactly was the Pentagon hiding this tape from? They were hiding it from the families of the dead. They were hiding it from the American public. They were hiding it from you. The war correspondent on the ground sees the blood, but the operator in the sky sees the math. The state apparatus instantly calculated that the truth was far more dangerous than the lie. 34 dead sailors is a tragedy, but a severed geopolitical alliance in the Middle East is a strategic catastrophe. The bureaucracy made its choice before the smoke even cleared. They buried the tape, and they buried the treason along with it. We now possess the indisputable audio proof of the strike. We know how the massacre was executed, and we know they knew exactly who they were killing. But a murder of this magnitude requires an equally massive motive. What was the USS Liberty broadcasting that made it so incredibly dangerous? To understand why they had to die, we must pull back the lens from the Mediterranean and look at the global chessboard. We are hunting for the motive. We are no longer hunting for the murder weapon. We have the audio. We have the shrapnel. Now, I need you to step into the tactical map room. Look at the topographical holographic projection dominating this space. We are looking at the Sinai Peninsula and the glowing, jagged ridges of the Golan Heights. This is the grand geopolitical chessboard of June 1967. Troop movements are represented by aggressive, glowing red arrows pushing rapidly across the desert terrain. You are watching a war unfold in real time. But on this board, information is a weapon far more lethal than a squadron of Mirage fighters. If a single intelligence ship knows too much, it suddenly becomes a strategic threat greater than an entire aircraft carrier. The USS Liberty was not just floating off the coast. It was actively vacuuming up the electronic nervous system of the entire Middle East. And someone on this map realized the ship was looking in the wrong direction. The official narrative of the Six-Day War is written in stone. It was sold to the world as a purely defensive struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. But the raw data flowing into the Liberty's antennas told a radically different story. The cryptologists below deck were not intercepting defensive chatter. They were capturing the exact operational orders for a massive, preemptive armored offensive directly into the Golan Heights. This was the anomaly that got 34 American sailors killed. The glowing red arrows on our tactical map were pushing into Syrian territory, completely contradicting the diplomatic cables being fed to the United Nations. The USS Liberty was sitting right on the maritime border, recording the undeniable proof of an unprovoked land grab. It was the only uncontrolled ear in the theater of operations. And in the mathematics of war, an uncontrolled ear is an unacceptable risk. You have to understand the speed of mid-century intelligence. If those intercept operators finished translating the Golan Heights offensive orders, that data would hit the teletypes in Washington within minutes. The White House would be forced to look at the undeniable reality on the ground. President Johnson would have zero political cover to ignore it. The geopolitical pressure to stop the offensive would be instantaneous and absolute. Broadcasting this raw intelligence back to the Pentagon would have triggered a catastrophic chain reaction for the attacking nation. The United States would be legally and morally obligated to intervene diplomatically, instantly halting the invasion before the territorial objectives could be secured. The Liberty was about to pull the emergency brake on a meticulously planned regional conquest. The ship was no longer an ally. It was a countdown timer to an enforced ceasefire. Put yourself in the war room of the High Command planning this offensive. You see the American ship on your radar. You know exactly what they are listening to. You have a choice. Let the ship transmit and lose the Golan Heights forever. Or sink the ship, blame it on the fog of war, and buy yourselves just enough time to rewrite the map of the Middle East. It is a brutal, cold-blooded calculation. Morality is irrelevant. The only metric that matters is the window of opportunity. The attack on the USS Liberty was a highly calculated risk, designed to execute one specific objective: enforce a temporary 72-hour informational blackout. They did not need to sink the American fleet. They simply needed to blind the National Security Agency's primary ear in the region for exactly 3 days. 72 hours of static on the frequency. That was exactly the time required for the armored columns to secure the high ground before the superpower could react. This is why the first wave of fighter jets systematically targeted the communication arrays. They were not trying to disable the engines. They were cutting the vocal cords of the witness. Every rocket that slammed into those satellite dishes was buying another hour for the ground troops advancing on our holographic map. The blood spilling on the deck was simply the operational cost of maintaining radio silence in Washington. It was an audacious gamble, betting that the United States would prioritize a strategic Middle Eastern alliance over the lives of a single naval crew. The attackers wagered that if they could present Washington with a fait accompli, new borders already secured by tanks, the politicians would swallow the bitter pill and accept a fabricated apology. They calculated that the Pentagon would rather cover up a massacre than unravel the regional balance of power. And the most terrifying part of this entire forensic investigation? Their brutal math was absolutely correct. Look back at the flashing red light on the carrier deck we saw earlier. The moment the rescue mission was recalled, the architects of the strike won. They successfully traded 72 hours of American blood for permanent territorial expansion. The delay worked perfectly. By the time the smoke cleared, the borders were already redrawn. The destruction of this intelligence ship was the ultimate price paid to alter the physical borders of the Middle East without superpower interference. The 34 men who burned alive in the Mediterranean did not die defending their country. They died because their survival threatened the geopolitical objectives of a heavily armed ally. They were a speed bump on the road to a new map, erased with absolute prejudice. Standing here in the tactical room, watching these glowing red arrows lock into their final positions, the reality of the front line hits you. You realize that a uniform does not protect you from the grand chessboard. The intelligence you gather is only valuable until it becomes a liability to the people signing your checks. The Liberty was sent to be the eyes and ears of an empire, only to be blinded the second it saw the truth. We are trained to believe that treason is a crime committed by individuals against the state. But the 72-hour strike on the Liberty proves the exact opposite. Sometimes treason is a bureaucratic policy executed by the state against its own individuals. It is a matter of perspective, logged in a classified ledger where human lives are traded like currency for strategic depth. The blackout succeeded, the borders moved, the ship was silenced. But the cover-up was just beginning. You cannot just erase 821 rocket holes and 34 body bags without leaving a massive paper trail. The battlefield is quiet now, but the true war of attrition is about to start in the sterile corridors of Washington. They killed the crew to stop the transmission. Now, they have to silence the survivors. The smoke over the Mediterranean has not even cleared. The deck of the Liberty is still slick with blood and seawater. But the real front line has already shifted. It moves from the burning hull directly into the stark white, fluorescent-lit briefing rooms of Washington. Down here, in the secure archives, surrounded by jagged torpedo shrapnel, I hold the evidence of a different kind of strike. A bureaucratic assassination. The weapon is not napalm. It is a heavy typewriter and a thick, black marker. Look at these heavily redacted pages, the black ink bleeding through the paper. This is the architecture of a lie. You cannot simply erase 821 rocket holes. You cannot hide 34 body bags from the public. So how do you enforce a total blackout? How do you silence hundreds of traumatized survivors who watched their brothers burn alive? You do not fight their memory. You weaponize the very uniform they wear against them. You threaten their survival at home. The mechanism of erasure is built on speed and shock. The official Naval Court of Inquiry was convened and concluded in a staggering, record-breaking 8 days. An impossibly short time frame for a geopolitical incident of this catastrophic magnitude. To the forensic analyst, this is not a genuine investigation. This is a containment protocol. 8 days to interview hundreds of witnesses, analyze structural damage, and review intelligence intercepts? It is mathematically impossible. The clack of the typewriter in that Washington briefing room was setting a tempo. A rush to judgment designed to seal the narrative before the press could ask a single dangerous question. They needed a sanitized verdict on paper, stamped with the official seal of the United States Navy, to hand to the grieving families. But the men who survived the torpedo strike knew the truth. They heard the planes. They saw the unmarked fighters. They had to be contained before they reached a microphone. The front line comes straight to the recovery ward. Surviving crew members, still bandaged and bleeding, were interrogated directly in their hospital beds. They were not debriefed as heroes. They were handled as hostile liabilities. Officers stood over these shattered men and explicitly threatened them with severe consequences if they ever spoke of the attack. They were promised court-martials. They were threatened with immediate prison time and the complete loss of their military pensions. This is the claustrophobia of a government gag order tightening around your throat. You survive a 2-hour slaughter at sea, only to find the real enemy waiting in your hospital room, wearing the same flag on their shoulder. The psychological trauma is weaponized. They are told that national security demands their absolute silence. Speaking the truth about the unmarked Mirage fighters is suddenly framed as an act of treason. The men are trapped in a sterile, bureaucratic prison of silence. The cover-up was so absolute, so suffocating, that it broke the men tasked with enforcing it. Decades later, the physical toll of the lie surfaced. The president of the Court of Inquiry, the man who signed the official document blaming a simple case of mistaken identity, could not take the secret to his grave. On his deathbed, he explicitly confessed that the entire naval investigation was a sham. He admitted it was a piece of theatrical fiction entirely directed by political operatives. The orders did not come from the admirals in the fleet. The deathbed confession confirms the script was written directly in the White House. The typed pages I'm holding in this sub-basement were dictated by men who never smelled the cordite or heard the screams of the sailors. The fix was in before the first witness ever testified. The court was not convened to find the killer. It was convened to bury the corpse under a mountain of classified legal jargon and heavy black redaction ink. But the architects of this blackout faced a critical anomaly. You have dead and wounded sailors who displayed undeniable, superhuman courage under fire. You cannot ignore their actions without sparking a massive internal revolt. The solution is dark and clinical. Medals of honor and silver stars were awarded to the crew, but they were pinned on chests in highly classified, secret ceremonies at secure naval shipyards. The press was deliberately locked out. The cameras were strictly forbidden. You give them the highest military decoration in the country, but you force them to hide it in a drawer. If the American public sees a battered sailor receiving the Medal of Honor, they will demand to know the name of the enemy he fought. They will demand to know why he had to save his ship with zero air support. By suppressing the heroic narrative, the government effectively erased the men from history. Their valor was classified. Their sacrifice was deemed a threat to foreign policy. Look closely at the jagged torpedo shrapnel resting on this archive table. Then look at the blacked-out paragraphs of the official report. They are two halves of the exact same weapon. One destroys the physical vessel. The other destroys the truth. The geopolitical machine requires absolute compliance. When a frontline intelligence asset becomes a political liability, the state does not just abandon you in the water. It launches a secondary strike against your memory and your reputation. The 8-day inquiry worked. The threat of prison silenced the crew for decades. The secret ceremonies kept the cameras away. The heavy typewriter and the permanent marker successfully buried the USS Liberty under a thick layer of geopolitical concrete. The architects of the lie thought they had won. They thought the paper trail was thoroughly sanitized and permanently locked away in these dusty sub-basements. They believed the truth would simply decompose along with the bodies of the crew. But the bureaucrats of 1967 made a fatal miscalculation. They built their cover-up for a world of typewriters, filing cabinets, and locked doors. They did not anticipate the future. They did not anticipate the evolution of the forensic analyst. As I sift through these redacted damage reports, a new weapon is waking up in the digital space. The ink is permanent, but the metadata is not. The silent era of the gag order is about to collide violently with the raw power of algorithms. The analog cover-up of 1967 is violently colliding with the digital autopsy of today. I am looking at a high-contrast split screen in a secure lab. On the left side, you see the original digitized document from the Naval Inquiry. It is choked with thick black redaction marks. On the right side, a modern artificial intelligence algorithm is rapidly cross-referencing the metadata. You are watching the black ink digitally burn away to reveal the hidden text beneath. This is the front line of open-source intelligence. The archivist is no longer just reading history. They are actively hacking a 50-year-old crime scene. We are weaponizing 21st century tools to definitively break a 20th century lie. In the digital age, a lie simply cannot outrun an algorithm. You can bury 34 bodies under bureaucratic concrete. You can classify the heroism of an entire crew, but you inevitably leave a paper trail. In the 1960s, a black permanent marker was a symbol of absolute state power. Today, it is nothing more than a temporary, minor obstacle for a neural network. The death of secrets is happening right in front of your eyes on this screen. The archives recently yielded heavily censored documents from the deep state vaults. In 2022, forensic analysts unleashed advanced machine learning models onto these fragmented files. The neural network does not read the ink. It looks for the negative space. It analyzes the specific gaps in the records, hunting for the statistical anomalies that betray a coordinated human cover-up. The machine learning models successfully reconstructed the missing communication logs of the Sixth Fleet. The pattern immediately emerged from the digital noise. The sudden radio blackout was not a chain of command failure. It was a deliberate, perfectly engineered firewall. The algorithm proves the communications were intentionally severed to isolate the bleeding ship from any potential rescue. This is the reality of the modern forensic battlefield. We are not firing bullets. We are firing data points at a massive geopolitical deception. The machine systematically strips away the official alibi. The perpetrators relied on the fog of war to mask their calculated execution. They blamed the chaos of the battlefield. But silicon and code do not respect the political sensitivities of the past. The official defense always rested on a tragic mistake in the heat of battle. We tested that alibi. We fed the specific atmospheric variables into modern naval targeting algorithms. We gave the computer the exact weather, the precise solar angle, and the visibility data of that specific June afternoon in the Mediterranean. We asked the machine to recreate the exact visual conditions of the strike. The environmental data was absolutely flawless. The sun was at the zenith. The sea was practically glass. The naval targeting algorithm processed the variables and returned a devastating, undeniable verdict. The mathematical probability of misidentifying the massive hull of the USS Liberty under those specific atmospheric conditions is calculated at less than 0.1%. A margin of error that microscopic is a statistical impossibility in naval warfare. It means the strike was entirely surgical. The attacking pilots clearly saw the unique hull numbers. They clearly saw the 5 by 8 foot flag snapping in the wind. They pulled the trigger anyway. In the mathematical matrix of this investigation, the word mistake is no longer an acceptable vocabulary term. The forensic focus now violently shifts from the military hardware in the water to the diplomatic back channels in Washington. We follow the money trail. Modern de-anonymization software is deployed to tear through the heavily encrypted diplomatic cables from 1967. The algorithm strips away the false names and the shell companies used to mask the geopolitical transactions. We cross-referenced the newly decrypted routing numbers with the global timestamp data. The system spits out a sickening, undeniable timeline. Hush money was actively being negotiated behind closed doors before the burning ship even reached a friendly port. The geopolitical architects were already balancing their checkbooks while the surviving sailors were still pulling shrapnel from their bodies. Look at the sheer, terrifying speed of the cover-up. The blood on the deck of the USS Liberty was still wet, but the international transaction was already entirely complete. You put a definitive price tag on treason, and you pay it quietly to maintain the strategic balance of the superpowers. The lives of the crew were instantly converted into a basic accounting error on a diplomatic ledger. The final, crushing piece of evidence comes directly from the water itself. We retrieved the raw sonar signatures recorded during the assault. Analysts applied digital acoustic analysis to isolate the exact microsecond of the torpedo impact. By measuring the precise speed of sound through the Mediterranean saltwater, the software reverse-engineered the exact origin point of the underwater weapon. The acoustic wave gives us the undeniable GPS coordinates of the attacker. The firing vessel was sitting inside a lethal, point-blank perimeter. At that specific, calculated range, visual identification of the American flag was scientifically unavoidable. The torpedo boat commander looked directly through his optics, saw the stars and stripes, and deliberately ordered the destruction of the ship. The digital autopsy is now fully complete. The black ink is burned away. The encrypted metadata has spoken. The official sanitized narrative of 1967 is dead on arrival. We have the strategic motive. We have the acoustic weapon signature. We have the diplomatic receipt. The USS Liberty was not a tragic victim of friendly fire. It was a coldly executed intelligence asset. The final digital autopsy leaves us standing in the freezing rain at Arlington National Cemetery. The storm of 1967 has passed, leaving only perfectly aligned rows of white marble headstones. As a correspondent who has waded through the redacted wreckage of this timeline, I can tell you the silence here is deafening. These are not the graves of men killed by an enemy. These are the casualties of an allied calculus. The physical reality of this dusk fades, and the cemetery grid transitions into a massive, glowing data web. The camera pulls back, and the marble markers become flashing nodes of global intelligence. We are no longer standing on a tragic battlefield in the Mediterranean. We are staring directly into the cold, mechanical matrix of modern statecraft, where human lives are merely data points on a strategic map. When we began this investigation, I promised to take you into the crosshairs of an unsolved crime. We tracked the shrapnel, we reconstructed the radio silence of the Sixth Fleet, and we decoded the audio intercepts of the killers. The verdict is now irrefutable. We did not find a tragic mistake born from the chaos of war. We exposed a deliberate, calculated assassination sanctioned by the highest levels of global power. This brings us to the ultimate, terrifying question that hangs over this entire investigation. What is the exchange rate between a soldier's blood and a geopolitical advantage? We want to believe that wearing the uniform guarantees the protection of the state. But the unredacted files of the USS Liberty prove that the transaction is entirely one-sided. You give them your life, and they calculate your geopolitical market value. The events of that June afternoon established a dark, unwritten precedent that still dictates military logic today. The geopolitical algorithm has a hard-coded rule. No single life, or group of 34 lives, ever outweighs the strategic survival of the state apparatus. If your destruction secures a critical alliance or hides an illegal invasion, the rescue helicopters will be grounded, and you will be left to burn. The true horror of this case is understanding why the cover-up succeeded for over half a century. It did not succeed because the acoustic evidence was destroyed, or because the surviving crew members forgot the sight of unmarked Mirage fighters. The cover-up held because the truth was simply deemed mathematically inconvenient to the global power structure. The diplomatic ledger required a lie, so the truth was legally erased. As we stand among the digital ghosts of this intelligence network, the sheer bureaucracy of the betrayal becomes clear. Treason is not always committed by a spy handing over a briefcase in an alley. Sometimes, treason is just a matter of bureaucratic perspective. It is a signature on a stand-down order. It is a threat whispered to a wounded sailor in a naval hospital. A crime is just a glitch in the system they refuse to patch. We inhabit a world where the speed of information has drastically increased since those analog tape reels spun in 1967. We have artificial intelligence, open-source tracking, and instantaneous satellite feeds. But do not let the technology fool you. The tools of detection have evolved, but the brutal logic of empire remains mathematically constant. The board is digital, but the pawns are still utterly disposable. This glowing web of intelligence reveals the true rules of the game you are actually playing. The state does not operate on morality. It operates on leverage. The men on that ship thought they were the vital eyes and ears of a superpower. They did not realize that, to the architects in Washington, they were just a temporary, floating asset waiting to be liquidated the moment the political market shifted against them. This is the final, uncompromising equation of power. It is a law of physics applied to human governance. Loyalty from the individual is absolutely mandatory, enforced by the threat of court-martial and federal prison. But protection from the state is strictly a matter of temporary convenience. The moment your survival threatens a macro-strategic balance, your distress call will be ignored and your file sealed forever. If this forensic deconstruction has shattered the illusions you held about how empires truly operate, hit the like button. That is the only metric we have to know this signal is breaking through the institutional static. Drop a comment below and render your own verdict on this geopolitical equation. Subscribe to the channel to keep this investigation alive, because we are not just reading history. We are decoding the present. The storm of the Six-Day War has passed, and the market of global intelligence has long since unfrozen. The casualties are buried, the survivors were silenced by their own commanders, and the strategic borders of the Middle East were successfully redrawn in the blood of American sailors. The physical evidence is fully catalogued, the motive is undeniable, and the historical crime scene is meticulously reconstructed. The marble stones at Arlington do not speak, but the metadata we uncovered screams a warning across the decades. We decoded the ultimate law of the global chessboard. You are a patriot until the mathematics of power require you to become a casualty. The illusion of safety is totally dispelled, and the final casualty report is filed. I am walking away from the front line of this history. The case is closed. Signing off.